Dan, in his mid-40s, is casually grilling burgers. Shelley, early 40s, waters her plants nearby. They exchange polite chatter. Through the fence, Kelly, late 30s, is seen hanging laundry. Mike, mid-40s, is mowing the lawn on their side. The two couples exchange neighborly greetings. Dan, calling over the fence. Smells like Mike's lawn is winning the Best Yard Award again this year. Mike, laughing. Someone's got to keep the neighborhood looking good. You know how it is. Shelley, smiling. Honestly, I'd rather have a concrete slab. Less work, more wine time. Kelly, teasing. Maybe Mike can start a lawn care business, huh? You're always working out here. Mike, playfully. Don't tempt me. It might be time for a career change. Shelley, to Kelly. Speaking of, you've been glowing lately. What's your secret? Kelly, pauses, uneasy. Oh, just staying busy. Dan, quickly, almost interrupting. She's always radiant. Right, Mike? Shelley glances at Dan, catching the odd tone, but brushes it off. Kelly looks uncomfortable, but quickly masks it with a forced laugh. Later that night, Dan sneaks out of his house. He meets Kelly in her backyard. They speak in hushed voices, illuminated by a single backyard light. Kelly, angry whisper, "This has to stop, Dan." Dan, pleading. Kelly, "We've talked about this." Kelly, cutting him off. "No, we haven't. I'm pregnant." Dan freezes, the color draining from his face. Dan, whispering, panicked, "What? Are you sure?" Kelly, glaring, "Do you think I'd tell you if I wasn't sure?" Dan, voice rising slightly, "Does Mike?" Kelly, firm, "No, and he won't. Not yet. But he'll find out eventually, Dan. This isn't something I can hide forever." Dan, desperate, "We'll figure this out." Kelly, laughs bitterly, "We? There is no we. You're going to ruin my life, Dan. My family." Footsteps are heard. Both freeze. Shelley steps into the scene from her side of the fence, her expression stone cold. Shelley, icy. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Kelly gasps. Dan stammers, searching for words. Dan, "Shelley, I can explain." Shelley, cutting him off, voice shaking with anger. Just don't. I've been suspicious for months. The late-night work meetings, the way you look at her, and now I get the confirmation I never wanted." Kelly, softly. "Shelley, Shelley, snaps. Don't you dare try to make this better." The next morning, Mike is outside, fixing his fence. Shelley storms into his yard, visibly upset. Kelly emerges from the house, alarmed. Mike, confused. "Shelley, what's going on?" Shelley, furious. "Ask your wife." Mike, to Kelly. "Kelly, what's she talking about?" Kelly, hesitates, looking down. "Mike, Shelley, interrupting. "She's been sleeping with my husband, and now she's pregnant." A heavy silence falls. Mike looks at Kelly, stunned. "Mike," quietly, "is it true?" Kelly, tearfully, "Yes." Mike, his voice rising. "For how long?" Kelly, choking on her words, "A year." Mike clenches his fists, pacing. Dan appears on his side of the fence, trying to interject. Dan, to Mike, "Look, Mike, yelling, "Don't you dare try to justify this. You've been smiling in my face for a year while sleeping with my wife." Dan hangs his head. Shelley crosses her arms, glaring at him. Shelley, sarcastic. Great job, Dan. Really top-notch husband material. Mike, to Kelly, and you. How could you? We've built a life together, a family. Is this baby even mine? Kelly, sobbing. I don't know, Mike. I don't know. The weight of her words hits everyone. Silence lingers. That evening, Dan and Shelley sit in their living room, tense. Kelly and Mike are in their kitchen, equally strained. The scene's cut between the two couples. Shelley, coldly. So, what now? Dan, pleading. Shelley, it was a mistake. Shelley, angrily, a mistake. A year-long mistake that resulted in a child. Dan, softly, I don't want to lose you. Shelley, bitterly, too late. Meanwhile, in Mike and Kelly's kitchen. Mike, staring at Kelly, I don't even know who you are anymore. Kelly, tearfully, Mike, I'm sorry. Mike, shaking his head. Sorry doesn't fix this. Kelly, desperate. I still love you. Mike, pausing, then quietly, I don't know if I can say the same. Days later, the four neighbors meet in Kelly and Mike's backyard. It's tense. Dan and Kelly avoid eye contact. Mike and Shelley exchange glares. Shelley, breaking the silence. We need to talk about the baby. Mike, bitterly. Yeah, whose responsibility is it? Dan, firmly. I'll step up. Kelly, quietly. This isn't just about responsibility, it's about consequences. Shelley, sarcastic. Oh, now you're worried about consequences. Mike, to Dan. You've destroyed two families. How do you live with yourself? Dan, ashamed. I don't. A long silence follows. The weight of the situation is unbearable. Kelly, softly, I think we all need time. Shelley, standing. Time won't fix this. Shelley walks away, and Mike follows after a moment. Dan, quietly. We've ruined everything. Kelly, whispering. Yes, we have. A few weeks later, Mike and Kelly are sitting at their kitchen table, an envelope containing the DNA test results between them. The atmosphere is icy. Kelly fidgets nervously while Mike stares at the envelope, his jaw clenched. Mike, flatly, are you going to open it, or should I? Kelly, softly, Mike, snapping. Don't Mike me, just open it. Kelly takes a deep breath and opens the envelope. Her hands tremble as she scans the results. She covers her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Kelly, whispering, it's Dan's. Mike leans back in his chair, exhaling sharply as if the air's been knocked out of him. He nods slowly, processing the confirmation. Mike, coldly, I knew it. Kelly, pleading. Mike, Mike, cutting her off. I don't want to hear excuses. Not now, not ever. Kelly, through tears, I love you. I made a mistake. Mike, standing abruptly. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. This question mark, this is a betrayal I'll never forgive. Mike storms out of the kitchen, leaving Kelly sobbing at the table. In Dan and Shelley's living room, the tension is thick. Shelley sits on the couch with a suitcase next to her. Dan stands nearby, looking desperate. Dan, pleading, Shelley, please, don't do this. Shelley, coldly, what choice do I have, Dan? You didn't just cheat on me. You destroyed everything we built. Dan, softly, I made a mistake. Shelley, angrily, stop calling it a mistake. You carried on with her for a year. You lied to me every single day. Shelley stands, grabbing the suitcase. Dan, desperate, I'll do anything to fix this. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Shelley, pausing at the door. You can't fix this, Dan. There's a baby now. A living, breathing reminder of what you did. She opens the door, but turns back for one last remark. Shelley, I hope it was worth it. Shelley leaves, slamming the door behind her. Dan collapses onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Mike stands in the driveway, throwing bags into the trunk of his car. Kelly approaches him cautiously, her eyes red from crying. Kelly, quietly, so, that's it? Mike, without looking at her. What else is there? Kelly, pleading. We have years together, Mike. A family. Don't throw it all away. Mike, turning to her furious. I'm throwing it away. No, Kelly. You threw it away the moment you let him into our lives. Into you. Kelly, crying. I didn't want this to happen. Mike, sarcastic. Oh yeah, affairs just happen. Real accidental. He slams the trunk shut and steps closer to her. Mike, I would have given you the world, Kelly, but you didn't want it. You wanted him. Kelly, desperately, I love you, Mike. Please don't leave. Mike, softly, after a long pause, I loved you too, but I can't stay. Mike gets into his car and drives away, leaving Kelly standing in the driveway, sobbing. 9 months later, Dan is at a hospital, pacing nervously in the waiting room. He looks haggard and worn, the weight of the past year etched into his face. A nurse enters. Nurse, Mr. Reynolds, she's ready to see you now. Dan follows the nurse to a room where Kelly holds a newborn baby girl. She looks up at him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and sadness. Kelly, quietly, meet your daughter. Dan approaches hesitantly, staring at the baby with a mix of awe and guilt. Dan, softly, she's beautiful. Kelly, without looking at him, she doesn't fix anything, you know. Dan, nodding, I know. Kelly, firmly, this doesn't mean we're together. Dan, sincerely, I understand. I just want to do right by her. Kelly, looking at him, then you'd better mean it. Months later, Shelley sits in a cozy apartment, unpacking boxes. A friend helps her. Friend, you're really doing it, huh? Starting over. Shelley, nodding, I have to. I can't keep looking back. Cut to Mike, sitting in a small rented house, staring at photos of his children. He sighs and places the photos on a shelf. Meanwhile, Kelly sits alone in her living room, rocking her baby to sleep. She looks out the window at Dan's house next door, now dark and empty. Dan, visiting a lawyer's office to finalize the divorce paperwork. He signs the documents and lingers for a moment before leaving. As he walks out, he glances at a photo of Shelley and their kids in his wallet. He puts it back and steps into the street, a man clearly burdened but trying to move forward. A year later, Kelly is at the park with her daughter. Mike is there with his own kids, who run up to greet their half-sister. There's a moment of silent acknowledgement between Mike and Kelly. They nod politely, but there's no warmth, only the shared responsibility of raising children in the wake of a broken past. Elsewhere, Dan sees Shelley at a coffee shop. She's laughing with a friend. He doesn't approach, just watches her from afar before walking away. Shelley notices him, but doesn't react, continuing her conversation.